Takes on the Odyssey are obviously mixed, although it's not quite split down the center the way that I had expected it to be. There's a wide range of takes on this film, and a lot of people that I really respect, whose opinions I trust, spoke very highly of the film, so I went to go see it. I wasn't going to see it because I, like many, had got caught up in the sort of outrage cycle related to the casting and certain things that Christopher Nolan has said about the film. The people with the most extreme negative takes are the people that have not seen the film. But obviously, there are many effusive takes, people saying it's a 10 out of 10. It's definitely not a 10 out of 10. I'm not really in the habit of giving like numerical scores to things that I talk about. I've never done that to any of the books that I talk about on this channel. But I'll just get it out of the way for this film. It's a 5 out of 10. It's not as bad as people were making it out to be, but it's also not good either. It has many, many, many flaws. It could have been really good. There are some things that I like about it, and I'll start off with those, but it just has, there's so much wrong with it on a technical level and on an artistic level that even if it weren't subversive, which it is subversive, but it's not subversive in the way that people were sort of expecting it to be. But even if it weren't, there are so many other flaws with the film that it just isn't good. There's no way that you can say that this is a great film. Most people who are saying that are certainly not being honest. Some of them are, of course, but... So anyway, the good things about this film, we'll start there, because there aren't that many. The scene where Cersei turns the men into pigs was fantastic. It was disturbing, it was horrifying. It was like something out of a Robert Eggers movie. Or some sort of horror movie rather than a Christopher Nolan film. And I wish that the way that this scene was handled had been carried over into the rest of the film, because there's so much imagination here. The men are, they're on their way home and they're sort of starving because they've been waylaid, and they find this island, and Cersei's the only occupant of the island, and the men go to her hut and ask her for food, and they're sitting there just chomping down on, just like guzzling down this slop. She feeds them like stew, and they're just sitting there just devouring it like pigs. And so I don't remember if this is in the poem, because I just read the poem like a couple days ago. Because like I said, I wasn't planning on seeing the movie, so it had been 20 years since I read the Odyssey, and I was always planning on reading it again at some point, but I kind of last minute decided that I was going to see the movie, so I read it in like 2 days. I went through it fairly quickly. I don't remember there being this explanation in the book, in the poem, about Cersei turning the men into pigs because they act like pigs. And that's what happens in the film, is they're just disgustingly devouring this food. And she starts to she doesn't just cast a spell on them and poof, they're pigs. She starts to caress their faces, and she sticks her hand down their throats, and she physically morphs them into pigs before your eyes. And it's really disgusting, and like I said, it's horrifying and very imaginative, and certainly new territory for Christopher Nolan. And I wish that more of the film had been done with that kind of that level of creativity. There are a few other things that I'll talk about that point in that direction, but I think they fall short in most cases. And each of these scenes that I'm going to talk about that I liked, there's also things that bring them down. So, like I said, I don't know. I don't remember this being the logic in the book that like Cersei turns Odysseus's men into pigs because they're going around acting like pigs, right? They're devouring our food, but not only that, they've been pillaging across the sea, across the land, on their way home because they need supplies, they need food, um, and so they just wherever they stop, they've been pillaging and looting and all of that. And so Cersei says, these men are pigs. That's actually their true nature, and their humanity is just a disguise. And that's pretty cool. Like I said, I don't remember that being in Homer, but Cersei's Island is full of all kinds of other animals who are men who've been turned into animals. So when they first get there, they see lions and tigers in both the film and in the poem. And so, what's the logic there? That some men are, well, do they just get turned into whatever animal they're most like? Because there's also a raven that Cersei has in a cage, who Odysseus just deduces somehow is her sister. So I don't know. It was a cool scene, but it brings up some of these questions, and the whole, because Odysseus figures it out because he's hunting and he sees a deer and he shoots the deer with his bow, and then when he goes to find it in the grass, it's a man. And so he figures out what's going on from that. But the whole reason that he's there in the first place hunting instead of in the cabin with Cersei is really annoying. Part of one of the things that really brings the film down, which I'll get to, which is the portrayal of Odysseus in general. I also really liked Polyphemus the Cyclops. I thought it was really good, really tense and suspenseful and frightening portrayal. He's just kind of this golem-like hulking creature, and after they poke out his eye with the flaming brand, he's just sort of like huddled there in a corner, like crying, and he starts to talk, and his voice is really disturbing sounding. Like it's very, very creepy. And so that was really well done. And then there's a part where after they sneak out of the cave, which they don't, it's different than the story every single person knows. I don't know why he changed that out of all things, but once they get out of the cave, Polyphemus chases them out, and like he jumps into the water with them, and he's like chasing them in the water, and it's very suspenseful and really cool. There's also like, when he gets his eye poked out and he's like sitting there moaning to himself. I couldn't make out what he was saying, but there's a line of dialogue later that says that he was saying Poseidon's name because Poseidon is Polyphemus' father. So he was sitting there like weeping and calling out to his father. And it actually, like, when you see that, it actually kind of makes you feel sorry for Polyphemus, even though he had just like horrifically devoured Odysseus's men, which was a very grotesque scene as well, and definitely like visually was just straight up the Goya painting. Is it Saturn devouring his young? I think it looked exactly like that. That was definitely the inspiration there. And finally, I thought the slaughter of the suitors in the finale was really, really well done. It was very satisfying and very sort of, the violence was like very visceral and very intense. It was a little, the filming of it was a little too frenetic. It's so fast paced that sometimes you can't tell what's going on. I mean, it's cutting so fast and things are just kind of blurring by. But the way it's done is really, it's really satisfying. Odysseus just kind of goes on a rampage. There's a scene where I think he's holding his bow in his right hand or something, or a sword or whatever, and he's like striving with another man, and with his left hand he like reaches into his quiver and takes out an arrow, and he just starts shanking the guy with the arrow over and over again. And the sound design, like the sound effects are so like loud and forceful that it just made me like burst out laughing. I mean, it was just such an intense scene. The people in the theater probably thought I was a psychopath, but that's the whole point of violence in films. It's cool. It's enjoyable. The first suitor who gets shot with an arrow, it was also very shocking and very, just like a very stunning act of violence by Odysseus. Very effective. So, this is like the last 30 minutes or something of the movie. It's all really good. I mean, except for the very end, which is going to be my biggest gripe with this film, I think. But, leading up to that, the parts that are actually in the poem of the slaughter of the suitors and everything was really exciting and really fun and very well done. And that's the heroic part of the Odyssey. Like the Odysseus' journey is like a quarter of the poem. The whole point of the Odyssey is his return and his murder, his slaughter of all of these people who have invaded his home, and his reestablishment of order. And so that doesn't really happen in the film, but at least the reestablishment of order, the sort of return of the king story, that's exactly what the Odyssey is, right? Odysseus is the king of Ithaca, and he has been missing, and now he's returned to restore order. That it's a return of the king story. We don't really get that in the film. We get something kind of related to it, but so the portrayal in the poem is that this is Odysseus's like great heroic act. This is the slaughter of the suitors, even though it is a breach of hospitality. Because these people are guests in his home, and he kills them, and he traps them there deliberately so he can kill them. It's still, this is still his heroic act, and I guess we'll get into the difference here between the film and the book, because this is hugely important. So in the poem by Homer, Odysseus slaughters all of the suitors, and then obviously their families want revenge against him. Normally this would start generations of blood feuds like you see in the Norse sagas. That's what all of those are about. But the gods intervene and make peace between Odysseus and the vengeful families of the suitors at the end of the book, and everyone lives happily ever after. Odysseus is reestablished as the king. He's home. He's restored order. Everything's good. That's how the story ends by Homer. The story by Christopher Nolan ends with Odysseus not returning as king, but returning, slaughtering some of the suitors, and then immediately leaving again to go into exile with Penelope. So obviously that is a change which completely rewrites the entire story. Because at that point, why should I even, why does Odysseus even need to get home if he's not going to be the king and restore order and rule his homeland? Why does he, why should I care whether or not he ever gets there, for one? Two, the sin that requires him to go into exile are sins against hospitality, like I mentioned. But not only the sin against the hospitality regarding the suitors, right? So Odysseus wasn't kind enough to the people who've invaded his home, therefore he has to go away forever. But also the sin of the Trojan horse, right? So the trickery of the Trojan horse, where he sinned against hospitality by presenting something as a gift when it was really a weapon, and then they sacked Troy and all of that, and that is shown in detail in the film. In the poem The Odyssey, the Trojan horse is mentioned, but it's not, the explicit events of it aren't described. It's mentioned by several different characters as being like Odysseus's great achievement of the Trojan War, because this is the way that the war ends, right? They've been fighting for 10 years. The only reason that any of them get to go home at all is because Odysseus does this. He comes up with this plan of the Trojan horse. And so Menelaus and Nestor and these guys and the people that Odysseus talks to in Hades, they all think the Trojan horse is great. Of course, there are differing perspectives on Odysseus throughout the sort of tradition of the storytelling tradition here. Odysseus is not the hero of the Aeneid, because the Aeneid is told from the perspective of it's a Roman who's explaining that how Rome was established by the refugees from the Trojan War. So Odysseus is the villain there, but why is Odysseus the villain of his own movie? This, to me, just seems like one in a very long line of subversive retellings of myths where, guess what, the guy who everyone thought was such a cool hero was actually just a freaking idiot, because that's what Odysseus is in this movie. So even beyond this, the change in the story, like just the way Odysseus is portrayed is not the same character as the myth. Like in the myth, obviously, Odysseus's most famous trait is his wiliness. He's a trickster. He's cunning. He comes up with all of these ingenious plans, and he gives good counsel, and he's a wise leader, and his men respect him. He's capable, and so on. None of that is true of Odysseus in the film. In the film, Odysseus is kind of just an incompetent moron, and his men do not respect him. In fact, he's not even really in charge of his own men. So his second in command, his first mate, I believe it's Eurymachus. I get Eurymachus and Eurymachus confused, but I think it's Eurymachus, who's played by an Indian guy in the film. He gainsays Odysseus in every single scene. I'm not exaggerating. Every single scene and every single decision that Odysseus makes, his men gainsay him, and they speak against him, and they say, you're wrong, you're making a bad decision. And so his men don't respect him. And there's even a scene, like I said, that shows that he's not even in charge, because they're on the ship, they're sailing. Odysseus has made a decision, says this, and he gives a command, and none of his men do anything. They don't move to follow his command until the Indian second in command gives them the nod. He nods, and then they go and fulfill Odysseus's order. He's not even in charge of his own men. And so, even beyond the fundamental change of what type of story this is, there's also a change in what type of character Odysseus is. He doesn't have any of the traits that he's known for. He doesn't trick Polyphemus. This has been going around on Twitter lately about Christopher Nolan said that, the pun that Odysseus uses to trick Polyphemus wouldn't work in English. And it's certainly true that you don't get all of the layers of it, because you don't get the wordplay between the way that the word for nobody sounds like Odysseus' name in Greek. But Odysseus just doesn't do any of these kind of wily tricks at all. He does the Trojan horse, and he disguises himself as a beggar at the end of the film when he goes home. And he doesn't even come up with that idea. Agamemnon tells him to do it when Odysseus goes to visit Hades. And I don't remember that being in the poem either. I believe in the poem it's Athena who tells him to do it. But yeah, so, Odysseus just isn't smart and isn't clever and isn't cunning. And he just constantly makes stupid decisions. His men literally stage a mutiny. And that's the reason that he doesn't go into Circe's hut, is because the men are like, no, you have to stay here. We're going to go. You don't get to go. And so that's why he's left behind, and that's why he's hunting a deer. And he sees that the deer's actually a man, and then he goes and rescues them. And so, yeah, it's just like Odysseus is just kind of a loser in this movie. And his two greatest achievements are shown to be his two greatest sins. I don't have an issue with that necessarily, because, of course, from a Christian perspective, tricking people and murdering them and sacking cities and slaughtering defenseless people, it's not necessarily a good thing. But if you're going to adapt the Odyssey, I don't understand why you would not adapt it from the point of view of the people who came up with it. Right? That's what makes it subversive, is that it's not even necessarily that he's trying to smuggle in left-wing messaging or anything like that. It's not a propaganda movie. And there's definitely complicated messaging in here, and there's a lot to think about. There's a lot that I'm not even going to touch on, just because I'm not even really sure what to make of it yet. Particularly around the character of Sinon, who's played by Ellen Page. But yeah, I don't even really want to get into that. But so it's not that he's smuggling in left-wing messaging. It's just that he's subverting the story, right? He's taking the guy who's the hero of the story and turning him into the villain of the story. And it's beyond just even going into exile, right? Because he's killed people and now he needs to go on the run. That's not actually it. The reason that Odysseus goes into exile is because the film makes it clear that Odysseus is personally responsible for the collapse of the Bronze Age civilizations. There's a literal line of dialogue in the movie that I don't remember who says it. I believe it's Penelope. She says, "Our Bronze Age is collapsing." Right? That's kind of the backdrop of the film, is civilizational collapse. And Odysseus is revealed at the end to be the cause of the civilizational collapse. Right? And so in the sense of these ancient classical epics, right, heroes are people who found civilizations. Odysseus comes back and restores civilization in the Odyssey. That's what it's about. The Aeneid is about the foundation of the Roman civilization. But Nolan's The Odyssey is exactly the opposite. Odysseus is the cause of the fall of civilization. And so he has to go into exile, and he has to leave Telemachus in charge. And I'm still, that I could project my own beliefs onto that and say that's actually a really good twist on the story. But I don't think Christopher Nolan shares my values, and I honestly have no idea what he's trying to say with that, other than that I know that it is subversive, right? It is an inversion of the story. To what end, I'm not sure. Like I said, I don't think this is not like people were expecting this to be out and out gay race communism, and it's not that. Right? It does have diverse casting, and there's something to the diverse casting. Like, there's definitely there's something that he's doing besides just, we need to have diverse people in the film. Because there's a scene, the first place they go to pillage after they leave Troy, um, the people there, the locals, speak Greek. And everyone in the film speaks American English. And it's very modern dialogue, and it's very, very terrible dialogue. One of the worst parts about this movie is that the dialogue is just abysmal. But they go to this island where people are speaking Greek, and it's Himesh Patel, I believe is the actor's name, the guy who plays the Indian second in command. And he's talking to the guy with an interpreter because he doesn't speak Greek. He's speaking American English. And he says, "We're Greeks from Ithaca." And he says this to a guy speaking Greek. So there's some message there, but I don't know what it is. Like, I'm really struggling because it seems muddled to me. And I could, again, project my own ideas onto this. I could say, yeah, actually, Nolan is sort of critiquing this globalist idea that anybody can just become any nationality or whatever. Like, right, you have an Indian guy. It's almost like the meme. Like, it really is almost that, that Indian, like, Wojak that's like, allow me to explain your identity, your country's identity to you and how it includes me. It's almost that. But, like, I don't believe that Nolan believes that. So it's hard for me to like, say, yeah, actually, no, this is actually based. Like, because I don't think Christopher Nolan is based, actually. So I don't know. I don't know exactly what to make of all of that. Like, the diverse casting, I already knew it was going to be like that, so it wasn't that distracting to me. But there's certainly something going on. I don't know what it is. But on the topic of the dialogue, I think in Christopher Nolan's filmography, it's really, his downfall is really in the writing. He's a good director. People are saying, like, this movie is technically brilliant, but it's subversive. It's not technically brilliant either. It actually has many huge technical issues, some really bad ones. But on an artistic level, the writing just sucks. The dialogue is awful. They did that interview prior to the film coming out where he basically just laughed at the idea that, these myths are elevated in any kind of way or should be presented in any kind of elevated way. I don't think Nolan is capable of elevating anything, really. I think he really, somebody, I think it was Granite Mountain Movie Club I was listening to the other day or last night, talking about this movie, and he said that Christopher Nolan makes movies for dumb people who want to feel smart. And I think that's pretty correct. He wasn't saying that as like a criticism. He was saying that as like, that's a positive thing. Like, that he's able to do that he's able to come up with these stories and this, he certainly has a unique style of storytelling that makes people feel like they're watching something that's much more intricate and in-depth, than it really is. Like, Christopher Nolan's movies aren't that deep. The exception is The Prestige, which is maybe the greatest film of all time. But that's based on a novel by Christopher Priest, and he wrote the screenplay with his brother. I think all of Nolan's best films were co-written with his brother. I don't know why they don't work together anymore. Maybe they had a falling out, as Nolan seems to have had a falling out with Hans Zimmer, which is also something that really brings this film down. I'm not even a fan of Hans Zimmer, but his music is 100 times better than Ludwig Göransson. Ludwig Göransson, I cannot fucking stand his music. I think he is a fucking horrible, horrible composer. And the music in this movie is almost unbearable sometimes. There's times when it's like it's supposed to be really tense, and so the music is really tense, but it's not tense in a good way. It's tense in an annoying way. It's tense in a way where I'm like, is this ever going to fucking end? There's a really long sequence at the end of the movie when Odysseus is sort of having a flashback about the Trojan horse and the sack of the city, where there's like this shepherd tone, which a shepherd tone is like when it's sort of like an audio trick where you have a note that sounds like it's just consistently rising forever. And so what you do is like you layer octaves over one another so that, and you fade one in and fade one out so that it sounds like the note is just continually rising without ever stopping. And so he has like one of these shepherd tones going with like some sort of offbeat rhythm, and it's just annoying. It's just like it sets you on edge for sure. But you're just like, can this please just be over? So yeah, I don't think you ever want your composer to be making your audience beg for the movie to end. I've seen a lot of criticism about the sound mix in general as well, and it is pretty bad. I mean, there were moments that were almost deafening where I had to like cover my ears because it was so loud. The film is also not visually very interesting either. Again, I've seen people praise the visuals. Technically it's beautiful, it's great. It's like it isn't really actually. Most of the shots are just very bland looking. Most of the landscapes are just sort of flat, featureless landscapes, which sort of, they make sense in certain circumstances, like thematically, like when Odysseus is on Calypso's island, which is of course where he begins the movie. In the film, Odysseus doesn't remember who he is or how he got there or anything. He's just been eating lotus with Calypso for 9 years, and he can't remember anything. And so it makes sense for the landscape to just be basically all you see is just flat water and sand. It's like a beach where I don't know what the name of this particular type of landform is, but it's it's a beach where the water is 2 inches deep, and just a vast stretch of this. And so it makes sense that Odysseus is there at that point because he doesn't know anything. He doesn't remember anything. He's just in his own mind. He's in this sort of featureless landscape. But then when they go to Hades, I was really hoping man, now we're gonna really get some cool stuff because it's the underworld. You can really kind of pull out all the stops when you're portraying the underworld. But no, it's just a flat, featureless landscape, but now it's black and there's fog. And that's it. There is a cool scene where the dead start to crawl up out of the ground. I thought it looked really good. And then there are some other moments where they seem to kind of float, ghost-like. Agamemnon sort of floats through the crowd of the dead to talk to Odysseus. It looked cool, but it didn't go far enough. I was hoping that we would get some Inception type of stuff in this, because the Odyssey, the poem, is very, very strange. There's really fantastical stuff and borderline sci-fi stuff. There's robots, there's possibly airplanes or spaceships or something. There's possibly time travel in this. You could interpret it that way, if you want to be creative with the Odyssey, right? You could, because the Phaeacians are described as having ships that can glide like eagles or something like that. So it's there's just so much that you could do creatively with this story, and comes up close to having really cool ideas, but he just doesn't go far enough because he's too obsessed with making it grounded. Right? The first thing you see in the movie is like a title that says like in a time of apparent magic or something like that, which kind of turned me off right away. But it's like, no, man, just like if you're gonna have a Cyclops, you're gonna have the Lystragonians, which is something cool there I want to talk about. But like, just go all the way, man. Like with the Lystragonians, like it's very clear that when they get to their island, they're not in the Mediterranean anymore. At least it does. I mean, it doesn't look like it to me, and I'm pretty sure they filmed this in like northern Europe or something, because it's snowing, and they're like surrounded by pine trees, and there are a lot of theories that actually Odysseus was not in the Mediterranean. There are people who think that Odysseus's journey, which is sort of, because it's sort of separate from the actual, like, Return of the King story, where he gets back to Ithaca to restore order. It's sort of separate from that. And, there are some people who think that this is like a remnant of an older story of a voyage to North America, even. And I can't get into all of that, but that stuff is out there. That stuff's always been out there. Even back in antiquity, people were making these kinds of theories. So with the Lystragonians, I mean, there's so much cool stuff that you could do. Like it's like he's blown off of the known world. He's in a totally different, like, alien land now, and he's but all it is just pine trees and snow. And so when they get there, Odysseus is like walking through the forest, and he comes on like this armored figure who's like kneeling on the ground in the middle of the woods for no reason. And he goes, hey, we come in peace. And the figure gets up and turns around, and it's like a child, but it's a child who's like bigger than Odysseus. But the child is wearing like a metal helmet and a cape and like armor and stuff like that. So it's like, okay, that's weird. But then the child just starts screaming and runs away. And then instantly the Lystragonians, the big ones, the big boys, just walk out of the mist, just instantly. Like they were just waiting like 50 yards away, all dressed in their armor with their weapons and everything. And I mean, it could have, obviously he's got an idea there. He's got, he wants to be creative with it. He's got the child. That's not in the myth. But it's just, it just fails on, it fails to deliver. It doesn't go far enough, and it ends up just kind of falling flat. And, it is an interesting battle between the Lystragonians and Odysseus' men. In the story, they are giants, and they throw rocks at Odysseus' ships from the shore, because and this is actually one of the reasons why people think that this story does not take place in the Mediterranean, because I believe in the Isle, well, maybe it was somewhere else, I forget. But at some point, Odysseus goes to a place where the sun never sets. It's just always daytime. And so obviously that's in like the very far north. And, people in ancient times knew that it was like that there, right? I mean, they had the myths of Hyperborea and all of that. Like, they knew a lot about the world. Like, it's very obvious when you read these things that, like, in the ancient world, they had actually explored much, much further than people think. But in the story, so they sail through like a fjord, basically. I mean, that's what's described, is they sail into a fjord, and then giant men throw boulders at them. So it's like that could have been like Vikings, right? Like if I were Christopher Nolan, I wouldn't have made these stupid looking like armored, the plate armored. I mean, they just look stupid. I would have made them like giant. I would have made them Jotnar. You know, I would have. It would have been like, oh, sorry. Actually, the Lysergonians were the Jotnar. Odysseus actually accidentally sailed all the way to Jotunheim when he got blown off course. You know, that would have been cool. Like, let's do something creative. But yeah, he comes up close to be doing something really cool, and but doesn't quite get there. So yeah, I just think the Odyssey just isn't a very good movie. It has too many technical issues with it. It's way too long too. It's 3 hours, and it really drags. It really is a slog for most of the film. There are good moments, like I said. You know, there are a few other good moments that I didn't talk about, but um, like I enjoyed the Scylla and Charybdis scene. That was pretty good. Um, you know, all of the sort of fantastical stuff. It's done well, but it's just I would like to have seen, you know, a small fraction of the amount of creativity that he put into the pig scene, put into all of the other stuff. So yeah, even if it's not like outright cultural vandalism, the Odyssey just isn't a good movie. It's not great. It's not horrible. It's, you know, but yeah, it's just not very good. It's a 5 out of 10. I don't really know what else. I think that's probably all my thoughts. But anyway, if you listen to all of this, thanks so much. Like and subscribe and all of that, and blah blah blah.